Yeah, it's just keeping us apart.
It could get nasty, we don't know. All right, first up, I'm hoping for a show of hands as to how many people here like science fiction. Quite a few, awesome. And you are actually allowed to put your hand up again if you'd like, but how many of you are still waiting for your letter from Hogwarts? Excellent. So, in today's battle of speculative fiction, we have science versus magic, and in the corner of test tubes, lab coats and sonic screwdrivers is Sean Williams. He's a New York Times bestselling author with over 40 books to his name for readers of all ages, and he has been called the Emperor of Sci-Fi.
I wonder why.
We do believe he is more Sith today than Jedi, so an evil Emperor of Sci-Fi perhaps. His sci-fi books do include several space opera series and 6 novels in the Star Wars universe, many of which have been co-written with Sean Dix. But one of his most recent series is the YA1 Twin Maker, which has Jump, Crash and Fall coming out later this year. Can you please welcome Sean Williams?
Thank you.
And in the corner of cauldrons, unicorns and wands, we have Jaclyn Moriarty. She's been weaving spells for many years across many countries, enchanting readers with titles like Feeling Sorry for Celia and Finding Cassie Crazy. Her most recent series is the Colours of Madeline trilogy, which has A Corner of White and The Cracks in the Kingdom, titles lovingly displayed up here, both of which have now won the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award. Jackie's Hogwarts house is Ravenclaw, but that's probably just for today.
Well, I'm a Libra, so I change my mind a lot.
So feel free to tweet it, but don't hold her to it.
No, don't tweet it.
So, to kick us off, Sean, what is the role of science in Jump?
The role of science in Jump. That's a really good question. I wanted to write an adventure story that anybody could read, even if they didn't know anything about science. But I also wanted to write a story where somebody who knew a lot about science would realise that I'd done the research and thought about it. So easy, really. So a lot of Jump is really like today, but with slightly different names. So they have a thing called the air, which is basically the internet or the cloud. They have social media like bumps and things like that, which are basically tweets. And they have all this stuff that's recognisably similar. But behind all that is this technology, the DMAT, which takes people apart, puts them back together somewhere else. And this is a scientific concept that seems really credible now because we have the internet and we have scanners and we have 3D printers. And if you converge those 3 technologies far enough into the future, you will have a matter transmitter. But it's so, when you actually look at the real science of it, it's so unimaginably difficult that even though I like to say that it's just an engineering problem getting there, it is possibly the biggest engineering problem we have ever imagined. So the science geeks tell me it's not going to work. But everybody else goes, it feels right. So the role of the science in the book is to demonstrate that I am aware of the problems, but I don't know how to fix them. How does that sound? A lot of science fiction is like that. I think you kind of wave a hand to say, I know all these questions exist, but let's just move past that and get on with the story.
So would you say that science actually creates more questions than answers?
Good science does, I think, yeah. Yeah. That sums it up beautifully.
Wonderful. And Jackie, in your world of magic, what is cello?
I just want to say that Sean's books are wonderful, and it's such a great concept. I really like DMAT, which is where you can go for. There's lots of questions in the book about the ethics of it and the meaning and identity and whether you're the same person or not. But despite all those questions, I wanted to use it. I want that technology.
Thank you, Jackie. That's very kind.
And in the in the Colours of Madeline books, It's set partly in the real world and partly in an imaginary kingdom called the Kingdom of Cello. And there is a girl who lives, a 14-year-old girl who lives in Cambridge, England, who finds a crack in a parking meter that goes through to the Kingdom of Cello. And she starts exchanging letters with a boy who lives in the Kingdom of Cello.
Beautiful books.
And in terms of magic there, I'm curious if you can tell us a bit more about what role colours have in cello.
Okay, in the Kingdom of Cello, colours have come to life. So each colour has taken on material form, and the form and effect of it. So the colour grey has become a violent kind of thunderstorm of a colour that moves around tearing people apart. So a colour's shade determines its form and effect. Purples and greys are violent, and lemon yellows move around in the form of little darts that can blind people. And then there are also gentle colours that will do things like mist into a town and bring out the beauty and everybody smile.
Magical. In the science in Jump, is matter transportation the way of the future?
Well, I like to think so. I mean, I travel a lot. Everybody travels a lot. Everybody has to leave their home, or most people have to leave their home to go to work at some point in their lives. And it'd be great if you could just step into a booth and go somewhere and be there straight away. I mean, it would kind of mess with your body clock if you could suddenly be in Iceland, you know, in the middle of summer right now, the endless days. It'd cause all sorts of problems. But I think it is the ultimate dream of transportation. This is actually a really dangerous topic because I just got my PhD a couple of years ago on this topic of the matter transmitter. I can't claim to have invented it. It was actually invented in 1877 by a really clever, much cleverer writer than I am. And it's one of the oldest science fictional tropes in the world. And it is probably the greatest science fictional dream. It's the greatest thing that science fiction has ever dreamed of because it's one of the greatest human dreams. Ever since we were coming out of Africa, you know, that long journey all around the world, taking over the entire world, I'm sure people trudging wearily across the savannah thought, there's got to be a quicker way to do this. Matter transmitters are the quickest. What could be quicker? The ultimate dream. Is it the way of the future? I hope so. I hope we don't destroy ourselves before we can build it.
I know, Jackie, you mentioned you've been willing to step into a DMAT booth. I'm pretty sure I might be willing to take the leap. Do you think technology makes us more human or less human?
I think it's technology that makes us human. Does that make sense? The ability to build tools and use them, whether it's as simple as a stick or a book or a matter transmitter, as complicated as a matter transmitter. I think it's the desire and the ability to use those kind of things that defines us as human.
And this future that you've envisioned in Jump and with DMAT, it's quite a multicultural humanity as well.
Yeah, it is. I wanted to write a book where race wasn't an issue anymore. You know, it's the great dream, isn't it? You know, for lefties like me, people won't be picked on for sexual gender or sexual identification or colour or height or lack of hair, anything like that. You know, everyone's equal. I wanted to write a world where the stuff that we worry about now wasn't an issue anymore, but people always find somebody else to pick on. So in this world, it's the people who refuse to use DMAT, the ones who will take a car somewhere rather than go through a booth, or will actually cook food rather than build it out of nothing in a booth, who have to live near schools so their kids can go to those particular schools, and their kids therefore can't go to parties all around the world, all that sort of stuff. I wanted those people to be picked on in my books. Not because they're wrong, but just because they're different.
That's the world of science. If the world was magic, what way would magic make it a better place?
Oh, that's easy. Magic would simplify all these things. You just, well, when I was thinking about this issue of science versus magic, I thought this is going to be so easy because all I need to do is bring in my magic wand and turn Sean into a frog. And then what's he going to do with these test tubes and beakers? And I got 2 magic wands, so...
I think this trumps 2 magic wands.
No, I was looking... So I looked up the definition of magic and the definition of science. And when you look up definitions of magic, you get things like magic is the otherworldly... mysterious power to influence things in possible ways, and magic is the delightful and the extraordinary. Magic is associated with words like enchantment and delusion and sorcery and wonderful and fantastic. And then you look up the definition of science, and it is the methodical observation of the physical world. And so I thought, again, easy. Which one do you prefer?
I prefer a different dictionary.
But magic also is associated, science is associated with classifying things, sorting things out, thinking, reasoning, rationality, whereas magic is letting go and believing and catching a falling star and making a wish and using the force. So magic is also a lot more pleasant, I think.
Are we into debate mode now? Are we? Sorry. I have to stop myself from agreeing with Jackie on lots of these points. Science is about taking things apart and looking at the way they work. But it doesn't end there. I think that's the beginning of science. I think and the idea that science is about questions is really what lies at the heart of science. Science, I could just sit here and say what's good about science is microphones, projectors, artificial fabrics, glasses, machines that can make clothes, air conditioners, glass, the chairs you're sitting on, the products that are in your hair. I could do this all day long. All these things come from science, but they don't come magically from science. They come from looking at how the world works first, and then thinking, well, okay, I've worked that out, but this means that I now don't understand this, or now that I've worked this out, then maybe I can do this. So knowledge leads to more questions, I think, is the key to science. The day we run out of questions, there'll be no reason to live, I think. But I don't think we'll ever run out of questions. And I think that's the greatest gift that science gives us, the knowledge that there's no end to learning new knowledge.
No, I'm not going to agree with you because we are. I always want to agree, but no. In response to that, I have two things to say. First of all, in response to your list of the achievements of science, I would like to refer to, well, you know what I'm going to refer to, TNT, the atomic bomb, the smart bomb, CFCs, leaded petrol. Did you know that the same person who invented the CFCs also invented leaded petrol? People say he's the single organism that has done the most damage to the environment. Anyway, and I can keep going with that list, and I'd probably end with the alarm clock. But also in response to what you said, questions are wonderful, but scientists are always finding answers to questions. So when you think of magic, I think magic is not just about sorcery, it's also something otherworldly, it's something extraordinary. It's things like music. I think there's some magic in music, and things like love and a baby's smile and mist on a distant mountain and things like that. So you can have this magical response to those things, and then you can have a scientist step in and say, the reason that the music is working for you is because the way that your ear canal works, and the reason that you love someone is chemistry, and loving your baby is biology, and what the mist is in fact, and they tear everything apart, and so they're answering questions. The magic is in the questions, and the scientists find the answers to the questions. And poets have been annoyed with scientists for a long time. People like Byron and Keats were so angry with Isaac Newton. Keats has lovely, do you know the lines in Keats had about, I was going to try and remember them. Philosophy. Philosophy is the word that you probably know that people used to say philosophy for science. And Keats said, philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mystery by rule and line, empty the haunted air and nomad mine, unweave a rainbow.
It's interesting that you... Can I just hark back to something that Tom said in the previous session? We'll come back to your point that in defence of the proposition that science is bad, you go back to the 19th century. Tom railed against the people who believe that comics are still in the 50s. Science is not in the 19th century anymore, and it's not in the 50s. There's an idea that science is all about deadening things by taking them apart. The wonderful thing that scientists now must rail, just like Tom did, against the idea that this is all that science does. The more we know about the parts of things, the more we realise that it's not about the individual parts, it's about the interaction between them. So we seem to have a pretty good idea that we are just our brain now, but we know that our brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, and that what makes us so extraordinary is not the bits and pieces of it, but how they connect and how they change. So what we have revealed by taking the brain apart neuron by neuron is not a bunch of empty neurons, but a whole new kind of magic, a real magic that's based on the real world that we still don't completely understand and may never completely understand because the human brain is so complicated that it can't understand itself at the present time. Now that is an extraordinary magic. And even though I know that when I met my wife, who I love deeply, and we're bonded by OxyContin or oxytocin, which one's the terrible drug and which one's the good one? I always forget.
OxyContin's the terrible drug.
Okay, not that one. We're not bonded by the terrible drug. We're bonded by the hormone in our body that makes you love a child passionately for the rest of their lives, just like I love my children and I love my wife. And that knowing that hormone is part of that process doesn't diminish it. I think it makes it all the more incredible that this chemical can be so magical inside my body. I don't feel lessened by this. I feel ennobled. Yes.
Where does science end and magic begin?
Exactly. I think you just crossed over into magic right then.
Sorry. But what is the difference? I mean, we were talking about this beforehand. Is it too early for this point? Oh, no, well, Anna said it already. I mean, science magic? Is magic science?
I know, she gave away our closing line, didn't she? The person that we were talking about earlier also was Isaac Newton, who is almost a dividing line between magic and science, because he is known as one of the greatest. He was for a long time the greatest scientist we had, and he brought in the Industrial Revolution and reason and rationality and understood the laws of the universe. But at the same time, as you probably know, he had a secret life where he was an alchemist, and he spent at least 30 years working, and a lot of people say, well, that was just chemistry, but it wasn't just chemistry he was doing. He was actually interested in the historical, mystical art. He loved the secrecy of it and the code words, and he had secret meetings with other people, and he really was trying to make gold and make the elixir of life. And that was something that was, after he died, all his alchemy was hidden away because people didn't want anybody to know that the greatest scientist in England was actually a secret alchemist. And then years later, when his works re-emerged, the economist Maynard Keynes bought all his alchemy texts at auction, and he made a wonderful speech where he said Isaac Newton was not the first of the age of reason, he was the last of the great magicians.
Absolutely. I think he was a remarkable, remarkable man, and a very strange and difficult and annoying and irritating man in lots of ways too, but great artists are like that sometimes. Great magicians are supposed to be like that. And I think it's hard to know what he thought, but I like to think that he approached everything the same way, but produced different things. So he's trying to understand the world through alchemy, he's trying to understand it through maths, he's trying to understand it through physics, he's trying to understand it through the mint. I mean, that's the other great thing he did. He kind of saved the British economy by changing the way they made coins. He was a remarkable man who did remarkable things, and I wonder if looking back now, as you say, all his alchemical texts were hidden because people were embarrassed by it, because the scientists were embarrassed by it, and I think that's a great shame. I'm glad that it's come back to light. But I like to think that he was a magician, And what survived and became science was the magic that worked. And we've forgotten the magic that didn't, because it's a cool story, but it doesn't work. I mean, I don't think any of that stuff has given us CD players or TNT or Winchester rifles or anything like that, all the terrible things or all the good things. But it's still a magnificent, seductive story.
Are people here today busy teaching about Isaac Newton to all of the young people that you work with? No? None? You're all going to take this story back? Awesome. While you're taking things back as well, Sean, are there any scientists that you'd like to recommend people study up on? Or shows?
Well, or shows. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson, what an amazing guy, there's so many great science communicators now, and I think we take them for granted. I mean, we still live in a culture that goes science equals nerds, equals geeks, equals anti-social. Sheldon.
Equals amazing.
Sorry?
Equals amazing.
Equals amazing, but how often do you hear that last bit? It's where's the 7-movie series that is written by the best-selling author in the world about scientists? There's Big Bang Theory. That's been doing pretty well, although it still characterises scientists as nerds who can't usually get girls. Where there's the Librarians, which librarians are awesome, and it's good to see they have their own show. But what else is there, really? I mean, why this? Of course people think science is weird compared to magic, because that's what our culture tells every child growing up. If you like science, you read science fiction, which, is for geeks, although lots of ordinary people read it. But everybody reads Harry Potter and embraces it. And I think that it's one of those feedback kind of things. We do need more stories about Isaac Newton. But is there a story in Albert Einstein's life? I don't know. He just worked really hard.
Do we need more stories about explosions?
Always. Because that crosses the boundary too. Magic's all about explosions as well.
Exactly. I think the best stories have science in them as well. I like fantasy that is hinged on the real world. I've never really been a big fan of fantasy where there are lots of journeys and dragons and fighting and battles. I always want everybody to just stop at the inn, have your hot chocolate. I don't want you out battling again. But if... so that's why I did the Colours of Madeline trilogy set partly in the real world, because I wanted a point of comparison. Otherwise, magic without rules... We already know that. There needs to be some rules and some context to magic, otherwise it's that issue of the genie says you have 3 wishes, so you say, well, I'm going to use my first wish to wish for infinite wishes. And then magic, and it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie where everybody in the room gets a gun, then the narrative collapses. If there's too much magic or too many guns, everything collapses. So I actually used a lot of science. So I had it set partly in the real world, but I also used a lot of science and read a lot of science for these books. So I really am on the side of science. And Isaac Newton is in these books a lot because I wanted to try to figure out scientifically how there could be another kingdom adjoining our world. And that's right, go on.
Well, I wanted to confess that I'm secretly on Jackie's side as well, because although I write science fiction, I also write fantasy. So the series that I have with Garth Nix at the moment, or that's just finished, the Trouble Twister series, is a fantasy series, middle grade fantasy series. And a long time ago, 37 books ago, I was writing a fantasy series set in Australia called the Books of the Change, The Stone Mage and the Sea, etc. And although that did require a certain amount of changing gears, because science is a series of rules, and when you're writing a science fiction story, there are rules to that world that you can't really break, as well as physical rules in the real world. And I hit fantasy and had to stop and say, well, what are the rules of this world? And it's okay if they break the rules of our world. And that took a huge shift, but not that huge a shift. So it's all very similar. And that in both kinds of books, as in realist books or crime novels, these stories are still about people trying to figure things out. So they're real people that they are also trying to work out what the rules of the worlds are, worlds are, and how best to exploit them or how best to survive them.
Exactly. So either kind of book. I love science fiction as well, and I love scientists. I think they are the most magical people. I think they are magicians, and their enthusiasm for the scientists who I spoke to a couple of different scientists, physicists about my book, trying to make it as real as possible. And I have a game in the book called In the Kingdom of Cello. They play a game called Deft Ball, which is based on a kind of harvesting of one of their vegetables, where the vegetables fly in the air, so they have to run and catch them. So the game is about throwing balls in the air and running and catching them. And a friend of mine who is a physicist who is helping me with the science who read the manuscripts, and I asked him to read it for the physics, but he wanted to know what's going on with this game, Def Ball. And he said, what are the rules? I said, I don't know, it's just a game. They throw the ball up. And he said, well, I'm going to write some rules. And he sat down and wrote a 10-page document with diagrams. And I found that that's the scientist working, and there was absolute magic in that. He brought my game to life.
That's great, because the heart of science is something that's the heart of every human endeavour, and that's kind of the scientific method. I mean, from the moment we're born, we're sort of flailing around, conducting experiments with our tiny little limbs, and the ones that work, that get us food or make the ball roll across the floor or get us moving, are the ones that stick in our brain. So we're conducting all these experiments, we're assessing the results, we're applying them to the next experiment we conduct, and that's really the secret of existence, is the scientific method. We just call it the scientific method now because we know a little bit more about that. But it's such a human thing. It's a shame that it's kind of parcelled off and not addressed more often in schools. As this is, if you understand this, you can do anything at all. This is the secret. This is the alchemist's secret. That's the great thing about the great difference between science and magic, is often magic is treated as I'm an initiated witch. So there are secret traditions in witchcraft that aren't revealed to everybody because it's a secret magical thing. Sometimes because if people knew the secrets, they'd laugh at you. But in science, it's there for everybody to see, and it's really easy to understand. And I think that's a really important, powerful difference between science fiction and magic as generally conceived by the public. Back to the debate, sorry.
No, that's fine. This is an amazing conversation. Sean's just admitted to being a magician, but Jackie, I believe you also have some spells.
I did read up on magic, ready for this. So I thought I would share two spells with you. One is a spell that you can use to stop your enemy. It's a very simple one. You get a photograph of your enemy, sprinkle some Tabasco sauce on it, then you put it in the freezer with some water over the top too, and you put it in the freezer, and then you say the words, fiery hot and freezing cold, your powers now are put on hold. So keep that one in mind.
You didn't use that on me before the debate, did you? Is that why I'm losing?
No power. The other one is the one to make someone fall in love with you. And this one, you get, the book of spells said, get a flat tray of sand, and then it said in brackets, please do not use a cat litter. And you put a rose in the freezer, a beautiful red rose in the freezer, freeze it, and you write your lover's name in the sand, and then you get the frozen rose out and put it on top of your lover's name. You draw a couple of symbols around it, and as the ice of the rose melts, so will your lover's heart melt. But then it said, then you put the rose next to your bed as a symbol of eternal love, which worried me, because isn't the rose going to die?
Maybe it stays forever because it's magic. We are running out of time for this panel, and I'm not sure if it's science versus magic, magic versus science, or everything is amazing, including Isaac Newton. But the final question is reading a science or a magic?
I need to think about this one. All right. No, you go.
I do. I was thinking about this yesterday when we were talking about technology and how reading has changed, the nature of reading. And I think I talked about my son reading The Hobbit and watching a movie of The Hobbit and playing computer games of The Hobbit. And people were talking about ways to get people to read and using basically science and technology as a way of dressing it up. And I thought afterwards that I didn't really finish what I wanted to say, which was that at the same time, all the books I've read for this panel, for this event, I would not want anybody to be making movies and games about them because they are magic on their own. That's what was bothering me, thinking I want everybody to just be quiet. There's too much noise. And everyone be quiet and accept and trust in books and stories that you can listen to the words of someone like Abe Nook, or you can read the words of Sean William and be silent in a room without all the technology around you. So there's magic in that.
Absolutely, and I think it comes back to something we said earlier, that reading is a really simple act. You can dissect it thousands of ways. It's the order of letters on a page. It's the photons hitting your eyes. There are various scientific ways you could look at it that kind of define it. But what happens when those words, when those symbols kind of seep into whatever's going on inside your brain is an utterly magical thing that can transform lives. And whenever I think of the magic of reading, I think back to being 6 or 7 years old and discovering my first literary crush, which were Doctor Who novels, not great literature. Amazing kids' literature written mainly by Terence Dicks, one of the great kids writers of the 20th century. But the incredible alchemical change that had on my character and the way I thought. It taught me more about science, even though the books, the stories are also kind of weirdly fantastical. The Sonic is basically a magic wand. That's the magic of reading. And 40 years later, here I am writing books like Twin Maker, which may have the same magical effect on somebody else. You're writing books about magic that will transform kids and adults' lives around the world. How could that not be magical? How could that not be so transformative? We'll never be able to define it. It's unpredictable. It's brilliant. It rules.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you don't believe in magic, I'm pretty sure we can believe in the power of Sean Williams and Jaclyn Moriarty.